Assembly chamber. Sound. 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 Assembly chamber. Sound.
Sit up. I call Declan Kearney.
World Social Justice Day is a reminder of the importance of global peace, human rights and international law. Unfortunately, these fundamental principles are under attack by international forces that still seek to pursue imperial and colonial interests. In today's multipolar world, peaceful coexistence, respect for international law and diplomacy must be paramount. Ireland's tradition of neutrality and now alignment means that we are widely recognised as playing a constructive international role in the world's affairs. We have credibility in advocating for nuclear non-proliferation, multilateralism and international peace building. Our collective resolve must be to achieve a peaceful world, a world based on social justice and on equality. That is why neutrality must remain the cornerstone of Irish foreign policy. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, every life matters. From the moment a baby is formed within its mother's womb, that is a life. From the moment that a woman finds out she's pregnant, she has a baby. She knows her due date, what age the baby will be at its first Christmas, its first summer, when they'll go to school. When that pregnancy ends in loss, it brings utter devastation. And right across this chamber, it has been acknowledged in the cross-party support for the introduction of baby loss certificates in Northern Ireland, as every baby matters and every life should be recognised and the loss mourned. However, the latest abortion statistics for Northern Ireland cause me deep concern. They show a 28.8% increase in abortions carried out in the past year. In 23-24, 2,792 abortions were performed. That is 624 more than the previous year's total of 2,168. These are not just statistics. Each number represents a precious life lost, a child who will never have the chance to take their first breath, and a mother left to bear the lifelong impact of this decision. For so many across Northern Ireland, it is a cause of profound grief and heartbreak to learn of the scale of abortion here. It is my firm belief that we in Northern Ireland remain a majority pro-life people, as evidenced by the most recent Northern Ireland Office consultation, where the clear voice of the people rejected the imposition of Westminster's extreme abortion laws here. We continue to work with like-minded people in exploring what more the Department of Health can do to repeal this legislation, which was forced upon us from Westminster, and introduce life-affirming laws and strategies. The battle to win hearts and minds for the sanctity of life must and will continue. We must ensure that women facing crisis pregnancies are met with real support and life-affirming choices rather than a system that too often leads them down the path of abortion. This month marks 1 year since the organisation Both Lives relaunched with a refreshed brand and a UK-wide presence, an organisation which campaigns on the value of life and health of women and unborn children and pursues the well-being of both. Every birthday is a celebration of the gift of life, yet each year across the UK, hundreds of thousands of women and babies will never experience a birthday due to abortion. This reality drives all of us forward with renewed purpose and commitment. We stand together with people from every background, all faiths and none. We stand for a life-affirming culture and the recognition and protection of every human life. Mr. Speaker, every life matters.
John Blair.
This month marks the 20th anniversary of the Hunting Act coming into force, which banned hunting with dogs in England and also Wales. This law represented a significant step forward and was celebrated by many who believed it would put an end to unnecessary cruelty inflicted on animals. However, while we celebrate this milestone as a positive development, we must also address the concerns raised since the introduction of the Act. Loopholes such as the research and observation exemption continue to be exploited by organised hunts. Additionally, the practice of so-called trail hunting, which involves hounds tracking a scent instead of chasing a live animal, misuses weaknesses within the law, allowing hunts to operate as they did before the ban. This exploitation undermines the very principles that the Hunting Act was designed to uphold. The statistics, Mr Speaker, are troubling. According to the British Hound Sports Association and media reports, over the past 20 years there have been more than 250,000 days of hunting, yet there have been only 25 convictions involving hunts. This raises serious questions about the effectiveness of the legislation and whether it adequately protects our wildlife. Since July, following a manifesto commitment, it has been the UK Government's policy to strengthen the Act by banning trail hunting. This marks a significant achievement in the effort to completely eliminate hunting with dogs in England and Wales. However, it is crucial that this commitment is translated into legislation and action by the Labour Government. Furthermore, Scotland in 2023 successfully strengthened its 2002 Hunting Act, enhancing regulation and successfully banning trail hunting. This positions Scotland as a leader now in terms of banning hunting with dogs. Conversely, in Northern Ireland, the situation is quite different from that in Scotland, England and Wales. There is currently no ban on hunting with dogs. As members may be aware, I intend to change this through a private member's bill. My recent consultation on this proposed bill revealed that 80% of respondents living in Northern Ireland believe that ending hunting with dogs is important to them. This statistic, Mr Speaker, sends a very clear message. In conclusion, while we take this opportunity to acknowledge the achievements of the Hunting Act after 20 years, we must also recognise the ongoing work required to close remaining gaps and ensure the welfare of our animals. We must ensure that all regions uphold the same standards of compassion and protection for our animals and wildlife, which we claim to be so passionate about. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Michael Brogan.
Cancórla, I attended a hearing of the Omagh bomb inquiry last week at the Strual Arts Centre in Omagh, and I want to take this opportunity to publicly acknowledge the strength, courage and compassion of all of those who have told their stories and experiences of that awful day on the 15th of August 1998. It has been truly humbling to hear the heartbreaking stories from those who lost loved ones, those who were injured and those who witnessed such horror on the day of the bomb. While the details have been horrific for many, and while people locally find it difficult to relive and remember the day of the bomb, it's also striking how, in many ways, their testimonies also represent the very best of humanity. We've heard of the heroism of paramedics and firefighters who work tirelessly to rescue people, and of the huge efforts of medical staff, both in Omagh Hospital and in surrounding hospitals, who worked around the clock to help a huge influx of patients. I also want to pay tribute to the people who were there on the day, who instinctively rushed to help find people in the rubble or bring the injured to safety, despite the risk to themselves and often having already been injured themselves. All the stories from that terrible day deserve to be heard and should serve as a stark reminder to us all of how precious peace is. As an Omagh woman, I have seen the town and its people recover and grow after that dreadful attack, looking to the future while never forgetting those who were hurt or lost. It is vital that the voices of victims and their families are heard, that justice is seen to be done, and that the truth does not become yet another casualty of that dark day.
John Bunting.
I rise once again regarding the Kingsmills Massacre, one of the most blatantly sectarian murders of the Troubles, in which 11 Protestant workmen were lined up against their van and mercilessly shot by the Provisional IRA in a military-style execution, with one sole survivor. Members have heard me previously describe in much greater detail from the inquest notes the full horrors of that cold, dark night when young men, still in their teens, cried out for the comfort of their mother's arms in their final moments, and where the groans of pain rang out into the night from the injured workmen before the gunmen callously walked through their bodies, which were strewn on the ground, and, to use their words, finished them off. Alan Black, through the pain of a body riddled with bullets, kept silent and pretended to be dead, and that's what saved him from a final fatal gunshot. Members will also know that I work on behalf of Mr Black and the family of John McConville as they seek truth and justice, and that's my privilege. They may also remember that there's an ongoing campaign for the release of the Police Ombudsman report into the investigation. And I say ongoing because that investigation has been continuing for some 13 years, yet there's still no report forthcoming. Some of that time is understandable, as the coronial inquest was underway for 10 years, but there was nothing to preclude the Ombudsman's investigator from continuing their work in parallel over that period. The Office of the Police Ombudsman had previously advised the families that the report was finished and then retracted. The coroner told the families they would receive the report on the conclusion of the inquest last April, but here we are, yet another month on, some 10 months in total, and no report. No timeline for its publication other than in due course, and nothing but a flimsy assurance from the Police Ombudsman that her office is not seeking to run down the clock and that Kingsmills remains a priority. Right? Talk is cheap, it's action that counts, and yet another month has passed with nothing. Mr. Speaker, I assure the families and the Office of the Police Ombudsman that I will keep airing this issue and exposing the ticking clock, which we're told is not being run down to the ICRIR, because I believe this 49 years of waiting for these families is frankly ridiculous. I believe it should be an utter embarrassment to our system and those engaged in it that these people have been toyed with. The report is ready. Oh no, sorry it isn't. You'll get it after the inquest. The inquest ends, nothing. When will it come? In due course. We're not running down the clock, and yet everything points to the fact that they actually are. So when will it come? We're now at 10 months of obfuscation and deflection over a simple question. When will you publish? No answer, no timeline, no information, and no report. This has become a disgraceful charade, and as they delay in the pressure bills, they should know that as time passes, the expectation on them for a report to be of value, depth and insight increases. It's a sad day when the victims have to fight for a report and use their funeral money to pay for legal action and try to obtain the report to which they're entitled, not once but twice so far. Those involved should hang their heads in shame at this despicable treatment of innocent victims and know that I will not rest until Mr Black has that report in his hands and his questions are answered. Once again, I remind this House that 10 months have now passed since the inquest, and I urge the Ombudsman's Office to release this report immediately.
Kate Nicholl.
Mr Speaker, infrastructure improvements are essential for economic growth, but we must recognise the serious impact that they can have on local businesses. When vital roadworks disrupt trade, we need to act swiftly to support those affected. Several businesses have been in touch with me regarding the ongoing closure of Knockbracken Road in South Belfast. This closure is not just an inconvenience, it is harming their ability to operate. Delivery lorries are struggling to access the premises, causing delays and confusion to suppliers. Customers faced with very long detours are choosing not to visit at all, and the businesses are concerned that that sharp decline in footfall may lead to customers going elsewhere and to never return. These businesses are vital to our local economy. They provide jobs and essential services. I've recently learnt that the Knockbracken Road won't reopen until July 2025. I've written to the new Ministers for the Economy and for the Infrastructure to urge them to explore urgent solutions, such as accelerating the completion of roadworks to reopen the Knockbracken Road, to implement better interim measures, improve signage, access routes to help navigate the disruption would be extremely helpful, but also to explore financial relief options such as a rates reduction or compensation. These businesses and the people who rely on them, it isn't just an inconvenience to them, it's impacting their lives, and I'm committed to ensuring that they get the support that they need now. Thank you.
Colm Gildernew.
Omagh, Ceann Corlia. And Ceann Corlia, I rise this morning to discuss the issue of Ann Street in Dungannon. And members may or may not know that Ann Street in Dungannon was a very significant part of the heart of Dungannon town, a thriving, bustling street that contained a mix of businesses, including hardware stores and bars and also family homes. In the early 80s, some 40 years ago, there was a proposal to regenerate Ann Street, and the wrecking balls moved in, removed the street entirely, demolished the street, but the redevelopment never came. Now, there have been several false dawns over many years, and many representatives from the South Tyrone area have worked on this issue and sought to deliver that much-needed regeneration and rebuilding of Ann Street. However, there have been several false dawns, and including a number of years ago when I became an MLA, I met with developers who had a plan for a mixed use on the site, which didn't come to fruition. However, in recent times, there has been an application made and is with planning currently around new retail and a mixed community development for the site. I would sincerely welcome that would take place. I think it's long overdue that the blight on the centre of Dungannon town would be redressed and that investment would go into that site. I will also commit that the wider regeneration of Dungannon town needs to also be a focus for a range of departments here, and I will continue to work with the traders in the town, with the communities in the town, and with people who live and work and shop in Dungannon town to see it being restored to where it should be, and the damage that was caused by the demolition of Ann Street is repaired and restored.
I rise today to highlight the fantastic work being carried out by both Mid and East Antrim Borough Council and Antrim and Newtownabbey Borough Council in supporting our veterans community. My constituency of East Antrim, and Carrickfergus in particular, has a long and proud military history, something which brings great pride to the local community and to me as a representative. Our veterans have made immense sacrifices to protect our freedoms and our way of life. It is our duty to ensure they receive the support and recognition that they deserve. Mid and East Antrim Council and Antrim and Newtownabbey have been exemplary in this regard, demonstrating an unwavering commitment to our veterans. Last night, councillors on Mid and East Antrim Borough Council once again confirmed their commitment to our veterans community by voting to renew their commitment to the Armed Forces Covenant. Mid and East Antrim have signed up to the Armed Forces Covenant in 2016. They have undertaken to support veterans by way of signposting, advice, veterans roadshows, to name a few, as well as the appointment of their own veterans champion, and the organisation and facilitation of a range of events and key event anniversaries and commemorations, including services for Remembrance Sunday in November each year. The formation of the Mid and East Antrim Veterans Support Programme has been a key driver in supporting our armed forces community in the borough, offering bus trips, walking tours, talks, health awareness events, and I'm looking forward to hosting the group here in Parliament buildings tomorrow with our party leader. I want to pay particular tribute to my party colleagues for their ongoing commitment to our armed forces and the veterans community, and reiterate this party's support for those who have and those who continue to put on the uniform and put themselves in harm's way to protect and preserve our freedoms. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I want to focus today on the lack of transparency in this House and the failure of ministers to adhere to their responsibilities under standing orders to respond to written questions. Members' standing orders are very clear. Standing Order 20C states, "The Minister or member representing the Assembly Commission to whom a question is addressed shall answer it A. by the end of 10 working days after it is published, or B. in the case of a question for priority answer by the end of 2, 3, 4 or 5 working days, as the case may be, after it is published." I regret that across several departments this rule is being disregarded on an ongoing basis. I am grateful to you, Mr. Speaker, for intervening and requiring ministers to issue revised answers to questions which I have submitted. These questions deal with the time lag between draft answers being provided by officials and the answer being provided to MLAs by the Minister. It is the latter, I believe, where the problem exists. While far from being the only offender, the Executive Office is particularly bad in this House. As I highlighted during question time yesterday, a question I tabled from September 24 about travel to Washington for St Patrick's Day 2024 remains unanswered. Less than a month out from St Patrick's Day 2025. That is simply not good enough. Standing orders in this House need to apply to all, including members of the Executive.
Mr. Speaker, last September I stood in this House to lament the decision by the Labour government to pause vital funding to my constituency in North Belfast. Not content with picking the pockets of pensioners by removing the universal winter fuel allowance, or with their proposals to destroy family farms, they then went on to attack one of the most socially and economically deprived constituencies in the United Kingdom by removing funding from North Belfast. The Shore Road Skills Centre, Mr Speaker, aims to transform the life opportunities of young people who call Shore Road and wider North Belfast home, providing them with lifelong learning and opportunities for future job creation. I made clear during those remarks, Mr Speaker, that I would leave no stone unturned in fighting that disgraceful decision. I want to put on record my thanks to my parliamentary colleagues who have stood with me the entirety of this campaign, and to the people of Crusaders Football Club who never gave up hope on securing this funding. The culmination of our campaign came yesterday, Mr Speaker, when the Deputy Prime Minister announced that the only project in Northern Ireland to go ahead and receive the funding that they deserve would be the Shore Road Skills Centre. This is an investment of £2.25 million in the heart of North Belfast, in the heart of a community that has been denied the resources it deserves for many years. And I want to express my gratitude to all those who supported us in this campaign. Although, Mr Speaker, this is a great victory, the campaign to continue to build North Belfast will continue in earnest. And I continue to put government ministers here on notice that we expect funding to be secured for the next phase of our development of the Shore Road, the former Grove Leisure Centre site, as Castle Community Trust rightly continue to campaign to deliver a dedicated resource centre in the heart of North Belfast. That campaign has my full support, and I look forward to helping secure the funding that they richly deserve also. Thank you.
That brings to a conclusion member statements. We now move to the next item on the order paper. Point of order, Mr Britton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, last year your ruling on ministers refusing to answer questions to members was clear. That's why I was so surprised when I received a written answer from the Justice Minister yesterday requesting information on how much public money had been spent by the Police Ombudsman in her court case against the Northern Ireland Retired Police Officers Association. The Justice Minister's response to me read, "This is an operational matter for the Office of the Police Ombudsman. You may wish to contact them directly." Mr Speaker, this is public money that comes out of the budget of the Justice Department. We are told day and daily by the Justice Minister that she does not have the funds that she needs, but seems uninterested in how much public money has been wasted on this court case by the Police Ombudsman. Mr Speaker, can you give me guidance as to how I can get answers for my constituents and the people of Northern Ireland who rightly deserve to know how much money has been wasted by the Police Ombudsman?
Thank you, members. A point of order. We will look into this and address it, but and you could go down the route of freedom of information if the information isn't forthcoming. However, in most instances, MLAs shouldn't have to go down a freedom of information route because you have the accessibility to members' questions. And I'll say this as a general principle. Ministers should recognise that they are answerable to the members of this House who are answerable to the Northern Ireland public, and if they're sitting on answers that they know they have and are withholding information, they are showing disrespect for the community in Northern Ireland. This isn't Castlereagh Holding Centre where people are sitting saying no comment, no comment, no comment. And I would suggest to ministers that it's not a good look withholding information from members where you have that information. And I will do my utmost as Speaker to ensure that members get the answers to questions and hold ministers to account, because that is the role of this body and this building, is to hold people who are making decisions on your behalf to account. And there's no point in having devolution if we can't hold our ministers and executive to account. So it is important that there's a two-way flow and that ministers engage appropriately with the members and ensure that the members who are acting on behalf of the public actually get the responses. But we will look further into this and take note of what has been said by the Minister in this particular instance, and the independence of the body that's involved. It does bring up another issue: who actually looks after those bodies which are independent and who are they answerable to. And if a body falls into a situation where it's not carrying out its work appropriately, who actually holds that body to account, because they have a very significant role in actually ensuring that other bodies are held to account, and therefore they need to be doing their work scrupulously and impeccably, and therefore they need openness from these independent bodies as well. And I thank the member for raising the question. Next item on the order paper is the second stage of the budget bill, and I call the Minister of Finance.
Moved.
The second stage of the budget bill has been moved. In accordance with convention, the Business Committee has not allocated any time limits in this debate. I call on the Minister of Finance to open the debate on the bill.
This second stage today follows the Assembly approval yesterday of departments and other bodies' final expenditure plans as detailed in the Spring Supplementary Estimates 24-25. In addition, the Assembly also voted the vote on account for 25-26, enabling departments to utilise resources and access the cash necessary to continue delivery of services until work on the 25-26 main estimates and associated budget number 2 bill has completed. Finally, members also approved the Statement of Accesses 23-24, which regularise previous expenditure. As members will be aware, departments are currently operating under the authority of the Budget Number 2 Act 2024, which authorised the 24-25 main estimates. Following January monitoring allocations being agreed by the Executive on the 16th of January 2025, departments and other bodies then prepared their spring supplementary estimates based on this budget position, and as I covered yesterday, additional headroom was also included. The Assembly agreement of the Executive's final budget for 24-25 allows me to bring this budget bill to the Assembly to seek the legislative authority for the expenditure of the departments and other bodies for the remainder of the financial year. There is a short window between January monitoring position being agreed by the Executive, estimates being produced and the budget bill completing the full legislative process. It is vital to secure royal assent on this budget bill by the end of March 2025 to ensure departments and other bodies can continue to access the cash and resources required to continue to deliver services for the remainder of the 24-25 financial year. I am grateful to the Finance Committee for confirming that, in line with Standing Order 42, the budget bill can proceed under accelerated passage, and thank the committee for its support. It has been necessary to request that Standing Order 42.5 be suspended for the budget bill to allow the bill to complete all stages in less than 10 days. In addition, suspension of Standing Order 39.2 has also been requested to facilitate prompt passage of the bill. Mr Speaker, the Assembly Standing Order 32 directs that the second stage debate should be confined to the general principles of the bill, and I shall endeavour to keep that direction. This bill will give effect to the spring supplementary estimates for 24-25 and authorise the cash and use of resources on services to allow departments and other public bodies to continue to operate for the remainder of the 24-25 financial year. This bill will also authorise 45% vote on account for 25-26 to enable departmental and public bodies to keep delivery of public services in the 25-26 financial year until the main estimates for the 25-26 year and its associated budget bill number 2 have been prepared and authorised. In addition, the bill will regularise expenditure on accesses identified by the Public Accounts Committee and will authorise cash for use of resources for 23-24 as described in its published report. Copies of the budget bill and the explanatory and financial memorandum have been made available to members, and the spring supplementary estimates 24-25, vote on account for 25-26 and statement of accesses 2023-24 were laid in the Assembly on the 10th of February 2025. The bill will authorise the revised issue of £26,536,605,000 from the Consolidated Fund and the use of resources totalling £31,041,383,000 by the departments and other bodies listed in Schedule 1 of the bill in the year ending the 31st of March 2025. The cash and resources are to be spent and used on the services listed in Schedule 1. These amounts supersede the amounts that were previously authorised by the Budget No. 2 Act 2024. The bill also includes a vote on account for 25-26, as detailed in Schedule 2, to allow departments and bodies specified to deliver services into the early months of the incoming 24-25 financial year. It is important to stress that this does not constitute setting a 25-26 budget. As members are aware, the Executive agreed on the 19th of December 2024 to consult on a draft budget for 25-26. This consultation period closes on the 13th of March 2025, and once the Executive agrees the 25-26 budget, it will then be brought to the Assembly to consider within the 2025-2026 main estimates and associated Budget No. 2 bill. In addition, the budget bill before you today will authorise accesses for the 23-24 as identified by the Public Accounts Committee for the purposes specified in Schedule 3 of the bill. While the majority of the expenditure by all departments is done on the authority of statutory powers provided through legislation passed by the Assembly, however, there are some functions which may rely on the sole authority of the Budget Act until appropriate legislation is in place, and there was some discussion and debate in regards to this matter yesterday evening. Table 6 of the Spring Supplementary Estimates 24-25 document sets out a summary of expenditure resting on the sole authority of the Budget Act. My department has been proactive in liaising with departments in order to reduce reliance on sole authority going forward. Before I conclude, Príomh Lascan Collier, I also wish to correct the record from yesterday evening, if that's permissible. Mr. Gaston raised an issue in relation to a table on page 7 of the Spring Supplementary Estimates. Mr. Gaston is correct. The table has set out the spends in millions instead of hundreds of thousands. I have asked for that to be corrected, and a letter will be forwarded to the Finance Committee, and also the correction of the record will also be placed in the library as well for members. And I apologise to the House for that error. I have asked my officials to examine as to how that came about. Also, in conclusion, I will be writing today to the Finance Committee and my executive colleagues, setting out the position as best as I know it, and discussed again at length and understandably at length yesterday in relation to national insurance contributions, borne consequentials, and the pressure that may place on government departments and councils and voluntary community sector moving forward. As set out yesterday, I will put in writing to members my best known position at this time. I cannot confirm the Treasury's position at this time, but I can assure members once I'm aware of the Treasury's confirmed position, I will inform members, but I thought it was useful just to forward on the information at hand. In conclusion, Príomh Lascan Collier, this crucial piece of legislation before us today is required to ensure that all day-to-day public services, which we all rely upon, can continue to be delivered to our citizens for the remainder of this financial year. On that note, Príomh Lascan Collier, I will conclude and will be happy to deal with any points in relation to the bill or other matters which may arise during the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I call Matthew O'Toole, Chairperson of the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker. I'm going to begin, as you say today, by speaking as Chair of the Finance Committee. I'll then give some views from my perspective as a Leader of the Opposition. It's worth saying, pointing out, as I had to yesterday, that there is an issue in relation to opposition speaking rights and chairperson speaking rights that I think either the Speaker's Office and the Procedures Committee do need to examine. It doesn't procedurally arise today because this is an untimed debate. Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, as I said, I will begin as Chair of the Finance Committee and reflect the committee's viewpoint as broadly as possible. I'd like to thank the Deputy Chair, Diane Forsyth, for speaking on my behalf in the committee's behalf, I should say, on the supply resolutions debate yesterday. It's also worth saying that I think all of us on the committee would acknowledge that Diane's experience as an auditor has been professionally useful and has added actually to our scrutiny work, and I think demonstrates the importance of that kind of professional expertise, and that, frankly, at times, though we will have political disagreements in all parties, non-partisan ability to scrutinise. And I would also acknowledge that Mr Gaston was quite right in pointing out this. Well, I hope it's a typographical error rather than a substantive error. It is our job to come here and scrutinise the documents in front of us, not simply wave them through. I also want to thank the Minister for his comments and use this opportunity to formally place on record the committee's congratulations on his recent appointment as Finance Minister. And I'd also like to thank his predecessor, Dr. Kiva Archibald, for her work in the role and indeed the assistance she gave the committee. She was open in her communications and constructive with the committee, and we wish her well in her new portfolio. To the new Minister, I would say the committee wants to conduct its relations with him in the same spirit of trust, candour and positive engagement as it did with Dr. Archibald, and indeed robust debate as we engaged in yesterday, and I'm sure we'll engage in again later on today. Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, first of all, I'll turn to the request for the committee's agreement that the Budget Bill receive accelerated passage, the Budget Bill 2025. The committee arrived at a consensus to agree that the bill is granted accelerated passage. However, members should not assume that this was a formality. There was considerable debate around the basis for this agreement, and while consensus was reached in support, some members on the committee were not in support. They will articulate their views when it is their turn to speak, as I will in my capacity as Leader of the Opposition in a moment. Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, I'm sure all members would agree that accelerated passage in principle is not an ideal way to do business. However, it is worth saying that the nature of budget processes mean that a budget bill, in fact any budget bill, is unlikely to pass in requisite time without accelerated passage. The Finance Committee received briefing on this bill as well as on the spring supplementary estimates for 24-25, the vote on account for 25-26 and the statement of excesses for 23-24 at its meeting on Wednesday 12th of February. At that point, the committee had sight of the draft bill. The committee's agreement to accelerated passage is predicated on, quote, appropriate consultation as per Standing Order 42.2. Additionally, granting accelerated passage to this bill will compromise paragraph 40 of Strand 1 of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and paragraph 64(1) of the Northern Ireland Act 1998. And while every budget bill has been given accelerated passage, when there has been an assembly to pass a budget bill, members were uncomfortable with the phrase appropriate consultation. Without a committee stage, the committee is not in a position to be able to provide input to this bill. Members are supportive of the current wording of Standing Order 42.2 being reviewed to be more reflective of the reality of this situation. That said, members are grateful to officials for giving their briefing. Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, members will also appreciate that as a devolved legislature, we are subject to actions and timescales at Westminster for the allocation of our budget and the estimates processes to which it is subject. The committee has also noted, following engagement with stakeholders, that our budgets would be much more strategic and better applied were they to be linked to a programme for government. Additionally, multi-year budgets would provide the security to invest and reform, and I'm sure this will come up through the course of today's debate. The committee has been briefed on work that the Department of Finance has been doing, flowing from the Budget Sustainability Plan and Budget Improvement Roadmap, which should take us towards budgets linked to the PFG and multi-annual budget plans. The committee is monitoring this closely and will share details it receives with other statutory committees as per the committee's role as budget lead. The committee is also acutely aware that this has been a bumper year for Barnett consequentials. With the Executive Restoration Package settlement, the interim fiscal framework and significant transfers from Westminster following both their main and supplementary estimate processes, our 24-25 budget has seen additional allocations on an almost unprecedented scale. In other good news, the additional funding has been baseline for 25-26. However, the committee has been warned by officials that we are not likely to see such inflows going forward. The committee would urge departments to apply all of their efforts to living within their means and to move beyond the culture of overcommitting budgets in the hope that Westminster estimates will come to the rescue and provide for the shortfall. I will elaborate on this in my remarks in a party capacity. Finance Committee has been commissioning much more detailed information on departmental spending that we are sharing with our statutory committees, including monthly returns, which the Deputy Chair has helped to drive forward in committee, and that has really significantly enhanced our scrutiny work, and I hope the scrutiny work of other committees too. It is our job to support other committees in their scrutiny, a job we take seriously and will continue to invest time in. Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, the committee noted that the information provided regarding the SSEs, the vote on account and statement of excesses, has improved following the commencement of the Financial Reporting Departments and Public Bodies Bill Northern Ireland 2022. The implementation of the Act has resulted in a number of changes to how financial information is presented in the estimates and the associated budget bill. The most significant changes being, number one, clear alignment of financial information between budgets, estimates and accounts. Number two, expenditure of arm's-length bodies, which has always been included in budgets, is now also consolidated into estimates and accounts, so that financial information can be directly compared. Number three, capital expenditure is now voted directly. Number four, separate control limits are voted in the budget bill for departmental expenditure limits for both current and capital. Separate control totals are voted in the budget bill for annually managed expenditure for both current and capital. Separate control totals are voted in the budget bill for non-budget expenditure for both current and capital. Cash requirements continue to be voted. And finally, rather than the Department of Finance laying a minute to authorise accruing resources, i.e. receipts, the Assembly now authorises the use of income directly in the budget bill. Now, those are relatively technical matters, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, but they have, in a technical sense, improved how the budget process works. But I'll come on to offer some broader conclusions in my political remarks. During its consideration of the bill, indeed during all of the evidence sessions on the budget and related issues, the committee has reflected on the considerable complexity of the budget process. This tends to be compounded by the liberal use of technical terms and accounting principles which are alien to most people. There is pressure on the Finance Committee to understand the processes and terminology, and I commend members on the committee for their diligence in this regard. And even the most dedicated members of the Finance Committee will sometimes find themselves having to penetrate extremely technical terms and concepts, and it is always important for us to, first of all, understand it, but also try and unpack it and explain it to the wider public and indeed our Assembly colleagues. As members are aware, budget bills provide the statutory means for the Assembly to authorise spending by departments and issue cash to departments to fund this expenditure. They also hold departments accountable for managing and controlling that spending within the limits authorised for the financial year. As I indicated, budget bills are supported by the estimates process, with the January monitoring position agreed by the Executive on the 16th of January. It's important to stress that executive budgets just set the Executive's spending plans. They do not give departments the legal authority to draw down the use of cash or resources. That is only done through budget bills and the associated supply resolutions. This budget bill signals that we are coming to the end of the 24-25 financial year, with departmental accounts comparing their audited return against the limits voted by the Assembly. The 24-25 budget began its life on the 24th of April 2024, following its agreement by the Executive. Following this, the main estimates 24-25 were prepared, and the budget number 2, Act Northern Ireland 2024, received royal assent on the 18th of October 2024, so giving departments the authority to spend. The spring supplementary estimates were commissioned on the 27th of November 2024, and following the January monitoring round process completing, the Executive agreed the final 24-25 budget position on the 16th of January 2025. This allowed the completion of SSE templates, which required the finalising of departmental expenditure plans, recording on accounting systems, preparing estimates templates and receiving final internal approvals and clearance from ministers. This process wrapped up on the 23rd of January 2025, and the department's supply team then compiled the 18 estimates across departments and public bodies. These are what is contained in this document, the SSE Memorandum. The completion of the 24-25 SSEs provides a reconciliation between the main estimate budget position and the spring supplementary estimate budget position. Headroom built into these spring supplementary estimates gives the Executive the ability to spend any funding yet to be allocated on priority areas and to ensure that no resources are lost to the block grant. As members will recall, the vote on account at this point last year was an exceptional 65%. This was due to the place we found ourselves in with the sudden restoration of the executive. This year's figure of 45% is much more usual, providing as it does interim resources and funding for the first few months of the 25-26 financial year, until work on the 25-26 main estimates and Budget Bill number 2 have been completed. The vote on account ensures that departmental business can continue before the Assembly considers the budget at main estimates prior to summer recess. In terms of next steps for this budget bill, the committee has been led to expect that consideration stage will be held next Monday, the 24th of February, with further consideration stage and final stage both happening on the 25th of February. Beyond that, royal assent should be received by the 24th of March, i.e. before the end of the financial year. I now want to turn to the favourite subject of many members, the use of the sole authority of the Budget Act, or the black box in the vernacular. As members will no doubt be aware, any charge upon public funds must be authorised by legislation, and the majority of expenditure by government departments is supported by specific enabling legislation. If this legislation isn't in place, expenditure must generally rely on the sole authority of the Budget Acts. The absence of an executive and functioning assembly means that expenditure has built up, which falls into the sole authority category. When the main estimates were produced, the total amount of sole authority sought was £28 million. Following updates, the current figure has reduced to £25 million, and the majority of departments have indicated that legislation is expected in 2025. The Finance Committee has a specific interest in this, as members have been waiting for a financial provisions bill which will legislate for some elements of the current black box. Additionally, the arrival of a fiscal council bill will remove funding from this body from the black box. The committee, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, is increasingly frustrated that these bills have not been introduced, and I would use this opportunity to ask the Minister on the committee's behalf to redouble his efforts to bring these and other legislation the committee has been expecting to the floor of this chamber. I would gently point out that those bills were included in the 2024 legislative programme, not the 24-25 legislative programme as has been stated on the floor of this Assembly. So they are now already overdue for introduction by several months. So, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, I look forward to members' contributions during this debate, and I will now say a few words in my capacity as Leader of the Opposition. Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, I welcome the fact that we are here in the Assembly debating a budget bill. It feels like we're obliged to say that all the time whenever we are here doing anything. Isn't it great that we're here? Isn't it great that we're debating a budget bill? Isn't it great that there's an executive? Isn't it great that we've turned up and done our jobs? And the truth is, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, it isn't great. It's the bare minimum. It's what the public expected when they elected us. We need to do more than simply turn up. The reason why the concept of simply turning up is relevant to the budget bill is that all the budget bill does is authorise spending. It authorises the updated totals and limits that are set out in the spring supplementary estimates. That's what budget bills do. They are effectively contacting your bank and saying, we authorise continued authorisation of the use of your bank account and your overdraft for another few months. It isn't a budget. It isn't a strategic statement of how resources are going to be allocated in order to deliver on the people's priorities. We know, roughly speaking, what the people's priorities are because it's pretty obvious. The crisis in our health service, the fact that we have the worst waiting lists and waiting times, not just in these islands, but bluntly in Western Europe. The fact that we have a wastewater infrastructure system that is crumbling and is preventing basic economic development. The fact that in other areas of our public services we are crying out for reform in order to deliver the basics that the public in a democracy should expect. Those are clearly the priorities. Now, there's a programme for government, currently in draft form, not signed off, not finalised, with lots of vague descriptive text, but not clear targets. I don't know, perhaps the Minister can update us in his winding remarks, and when perhaps other members of executive parties can update us whether they think the programme for government is going to be finalised. But the programme for government, even when it is finalised, unless it's backed by a coherent, ideally multi-year budget, and the Minister no doubt will say in his remarks that a multi-year budget isn't legally possible until Westminster provides him with a multi-year spending review, and that's true, but as I've said and we've discussed, it doesn't stop him providing an indicative pathway, and indeed he appears to be moving in that direction. But the absence of a clear strategic plan means that this document, the budget bill, is only an authorisation of spending. It isn't a budget. I have to say this in my capacity as chair of the Finance Committee, and when I'm talking to some of my colleagues, and even sometimes when I'm talking to constituents and the media, I have to say the budget bill is of course part of the budget process, but it isn't the budget. The budget is the document that we haven't yet debated. Because, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, it was sent to members in it was emailed to members in a written statement just before Christmas. We then got further allocations a couple of weeks ago, again on a non-sitting day. We haven't had a fulsome debate yet in this chamber on the 25-26 budget. The consultation period for the document closes in about 3 weeks' time, and after that, 3.5 weeks' time, and after that it still has to be agreed, based on what the Minister said, by the Executive. It will then eventually come back to the floor of the Assembly. By that stage, one assumes this bill, the budget bill authorising 45% of spending for the new financial year, will already have passed. So, will we even be debating the draft budget for the final budget for 25-26 before the start of the new financial year? Will the public be able to understand what we're prioritising, how we're allocating resources in order to deal with their priorities? It appears increasingly unlikely, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, and it's part of a broader systemic challenge with this Executive, which is, I'm afraid, an apparent desire to simply get credit for turning up, for simply keeping the wheels turning and perhaps keeping the lights on, marking time, the odd photo op, the odd summit with a nice photo op and some PR around it. No clear, decisive targets for improving public services, no clarity for the public on when they're going to have a plan.
Could you just, I've given you a lot of latitude, and I'm sure you'll appreciate that, particularly in your role as spokesperson for the opposition, or the official opposition. But can I just ask, even in the broadest scope, that you return to the budget bill rather than the lack of a budget, if you don't mind?
Return to the budget bill, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, and of course I respect any guidance from the Chair. Of course, it's important to say that the budget bill literally authorises absolutely every bit of spending that the Executive does. So in theory, absolutely everything is within scope of the budget bill, because if there was no budget bill, there'd be nothing to talk about. I'm not going to be that. Having understood your guidance, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, I will come back
Matthew,
to the...
You're ripping it, frankly. So I have the scope. I've got legal advice. Excuse me, I'm not finished. I've got legal advice about the scope of the budget bill. I have read the budget bill. I have read the legal advice. And I have allowed and will facilitate members stretching, because this is a democratic institution. So, for the second time, and without challenging the Chair, could the member return to the debate of the budget bill, if he doesn't mind? Thank you.
Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, the budget bill in front of us lists the various areas that the Executive is spending money on, but it does not offer any prioritisation. The budget bill is simply a list of areas where money is legally spent, but there's no opportunity for the public to know how much money is being spent on reducing waiting lists, how much money is being spent or invested in recovering our wastewater infrastructure. I could, of course, find the relevant bit of the budget bill which mentions funding Northern Ireland Water, because that's in the budget bill. I could, of course, find the bit of the budget bill which mentions funding the health service, because that's all in the budget bill. But there is no clarity whatsoever in this document for the public in terms of how the Executive is going about prioritising the things they care about. That is not the fault of the budget bill. That's not what the budget bill is there to do. The budget bill is simply there to legally authorise spending. But the public deserve more than that, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker. They deserve more than simply marking time, turning up and keeping the lights on and then expecting credit for it. I just turn briefly, before I conclude my remarks, to a couple of specific points which the Minister touched on. He touched on the use of the so-called black box, the sole authority of the Budget Act. It is true that those amounts have come down significantly. It's also true to say that there are areas that are promised in legislation, specifically the Financial Provisions Bill and also the Fiscal Council Bill. I'd like to know when those bits of legislation are going to be presented before the Assembly, because they're not. It was said yesterday that these were the suggestion was that these were hideously complex pieces of legislation that would take ages and that the officials needed more time. Well, to be fair, officials had years whenever this place was down. The Financial Provisions Bill and the Fiscal Council Bill are not politically controversial bits of legislation. I'm at a loss as to why officials and drafters could not have been drafting those bills whenever ministers weren't in office. Executive parties were having meetings about a programme for government. Activity was going on. I presume these people were still at work, so I would like to understand when exactly we will have these pieces of legislation in front of us. I also, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, want to touch on the question of scrutiny, because Mr Gaston is right to point out a typographical error in the Spring Supplementary Estimates document. It's our job to take seriously the scrutiny of these documents, and insofar as we are able to understand them, they aren't that hideously complicated. One of my great frustrations is that individual statutory committees, I think, barely scrutinise these documents at all. But the honest truth is they're in a better position to understand why money might have moved around in their individual departments than the Finance Committee is. If you look at some of the changes, when I turn to, for example, and I should have had it marked, a specific movement in the Health Department around a fall in a significant adjustment in their capital budget for 24-25. I'm not sure. I would imagine that might be connected to the Children's Hospital debacle, but I don't know because I'm not on that committee. It's the job of individual committees not simply to get the headlines, but to scrutinise exactly what's happening in the finances of their department, and for our Finance Committee to provide strategic direction. And I hope we'll be doing more of that going forward, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker. Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, to conclude my remarks on the budget bill, the budget bill itself, while it may not go to a division, it would be hard for us to jump up and down in ecstatic support for a bill which authorises spending in the absence of a clear strategic plan to deal with a crisis in our public services, to get waiting lists down and provide a clear plan as to how the Executive is spending money on that, to invest in our wastewater infrastructure, to rescue public services, which are now, frankly, the public have waited long enough for a plan to see them rescued, and they are beyond cynicism with the Executive in these institutions. They deserve better. They deserve a coherent multi-year budget when one is able to be delivered, and they deserve a strategic plan from the Executive. So while it is welcome that spending continues to be authorised, in the same way that it's welcome that we're in this room and the lights are on and we're all talking, it's not good enough and it needs to get better. Thank you, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker.
Much appreciated, Matthew. I call Philip McGuigan, Chair of the Health Committee.
Last Ken Collier, and I welcome the opportunity to contribute to today's debate on behalf of the Committee for Health. As I mentioned in yesterday's debate, the financial landscape we find ourselves in has presented significant challenges to all executive departments, and this has had a considerable impact on the provision of services within our communities. These financial challenges are having a pronounced effect on those within our communities who require treatment in our health system and on those staff who work in the health and social care system. And just at the outset, I do want to pay tribute to our health and social care workers, some 70,000 odd staff, who are going above and beyond to provide care and support to our sick and most vulnerable citizens, battling also against long waiting lists, longer waits at emergency departments and services that are stretched to breaking point. The health budget makes up over 50% of the total block grant and has significant implications for the health and well-being of the people we in this chamber represent. So it is therefore crucial that we understand its impact and significance. Over the last year, the Committee has engaged with the Minister and departmental officials on the budget. Just last week, the Minister briefed the Committee on the budget for next year. The Minister outlined that with this year's budget allocation of £8.4 billion, there is still a shortfall of some £400 million in the next financial year. During the briefing, members covered a number of areas with the Minister, and these included the national insurance contributions increase. Members highlighted the significant impact this will have on the health and social care sector, including GP surgeries, pharmacies and social care. Committee members were advised that the Minister has been in contact with the British Government Minister in relation to this matter. With regard to respite care for families, members raised the issue of the announcement of £2 million to be spent in this financial year and £13 million in the following financial years for short-term respite care. The committee welcomed this announcement at the time and is disappointed that only £1.377 million will be spent in the current financial year. The committee has requested further information on the plans in place for the incoming financial year to ensure that families get the respite they need and this important service is utilised fully. Access to GP services. Again, members raised the issue of the funding for indemnity for GPs and generally the pressure there is currently on accessing primary care. It's disappointing to see over the past number of years GP practices being taken over by trusts and a number of GP surgeries in financial rescue plans. This clearly shows the need for significant investment in our primary services to improve access. The committee also heard that in relation to the cancer strategy, only £10.6 million was spent in the last financial year against a planned spend of £34.2 million, and in relation to mental health strategy, only £5.9 million against a target of £42 million. This is extremely disappointing and outlines the significant pressure there is on the system. We need to see action plans outlining how money will be allocated in the future. Within domiciliary care, we are aware from briefings from the trusts and for the representative bodies that this significant bottleneck in the system is in relation to the provision of domiciliary care and the need for significant investment to provide sufficient service to allow the flow of patients through hospitals. We do need to see plans on how the Department will address this important issue. A member also raised the issue and cost of providing free period products in our health and social care buildings. When the committee was briefed on the statutory rule in November, we were advised that the cost would be between £1 and £1.5 million. However, in the EQIA produced by the Department, the cost was put down as £5.7 million. So that's a significant change in the figures provided to the committee, and have requested further information in relation to this. The committee have also requested a detailed breakdown of the expenditure for 25-26, but so far have only been sent information on how the Department has used the percentage split from 24-25 opening allocations to allocate the additional funding across the programmes for care for 25-26. And the Department won't be able to provide detailed information until many months into the new financial year. This highlights the real need for long-term planning within the Department of Health. The committee looks forward to further work being undertaken by the Executive to bring forward multi-year budgets, which will allow the Department of Health to plan long-term and to put in place planned interventions to address the waiting list and the increasing health inequalities we are all seeing. The committee is also keen to see how the Department and the Executive will link the budget to the programme for government. PFG outlines key priorities for health in relation to reducing waiting lists and the reform and transformation of public services. It is important that we and the public see the links between the programme for government and the budget with clear and achievable targets where progress can be monitored and measured. I will also mention the Department's capital budget. Over the past number of years, we have seen significant capital projects in the health estate. However, as with other projects, these tend to run over time and budget. Indeed, last week the committee went to see the new maternity hospital at the Royal, and it is a magnificent site, no doubt, that will provide high quality, safe care for many mothers and babies. However, there are significant delays in opening the hospital, and I would encourage the Department and the Trust to work together to get the hospital safely opened as soon as possible. I would also encourage the Trust and the Department to learn from this process and apply that learning to the build of the new Children's Hospital, which is to be commenced soon. I appreciate this will take additional resource and as committee chairperson, I am keen to work with the Minister and the Department to make that argument for additional funding to fund our health service and provide the necessary support to our health and social care workers. Prívlas Ceann Comhairle, I just want to speak now a few minutes in my capacity as MLA and Sinn Féin's health spokesperson, just to make a number of additional points. As mentioned, the Health Minister and his Permanent Secretary attended the Health Committee last week to brief us on the budget, and I want to thank both for doing so. I also want today to put on record my appreciation to the current Permanent Secretary, Peter May, as he steps down from this role, and to thank him for his many years of public service. I want to wish Peter well in whatever the future holds for him. As part of the briefing, the Minister outlined the anticipated funding gap within health. This is a budget with a significant proportion, over 50% of the overall budget within the Executive being allocated to health. And I know from the comments made in here yesterday and in previous debates from right across the chamber, there is a clear recognition that we must use that substantial health budget to do better, to produce and then implement plans and strategies that deliver better health outcomes for patients and to create a better, safe and working environment for staff. There are over 500,000 people, a quarter of the population of the North here, on waiting lists to have their first consultation with a specialist. That figure is unacceptable, and we need to see action in the year ahead to start turning the corner and reducing that number. This is especially needed within cancer waiting lists and services, where urgency is key to the treatment and outcome, and indeed in saving lives. The Minister does need to utilise the budget for the cancer strategy he has more efficiently to ensure all available money is spent on screening, diagnosing and treating cancer patients. I do welcome the Minister's comments that he made last week in the committee to put plans in place for a lung screening programme and to expand bowel screening, and look forward to hearing more detail on this in the time ahead. In this chamber we often debate in the past, and have done so on numerous occasions, what we can do about the growing mental health crisis within our society. So again, it was disappointing to see the Department hadn't spent all the available resources it had within the 24-25 budget. It's further perplexing over the last number of days receiving emails from groups like the Samaritans and others to express their disappointment at missing out on funding for projects to tackle mental health. My colleague Arlia Flynn has already written to the Minister on this, and I look forward to his explanation. We must see action to reduce the pressures on our emergency departments. This means action in our hospitals, but also action beyond our hospitals. We need investment in domiciliary care services and staff so that we can release the valve on hospital pressures, but also give the most appropriate care to our vulnerable in the setting most suitable to their needs. Ambulance waiting times have increased, and the demand for emergency ambulance care, coupled with ongoing pressures in ambulance handover times, show an extremely worrying trend. Paramedics and ambulance staff work in some of the most difficult circumstances and are the first response to medical emergencies. Unfortunately, staff shortages and pressures in A&E departments are causing delays, with paramedics waiting with patients for hours. Urgent action to address the ongoing crisis needs to be taken by the Minister and his department to improve patient safety. The Minister has prioritised tackling health inequalities, and I welcome that focus, as I welcome the Live Better pilot he has introduced. But key to all of this is developing and expanding on this and other initiatives. With regard to the pay deal, Sinn Féin has consistently called for fair pay and conditions for all healthcare workers, and we welcome that progress has been made on the issue. We also clearly recognise that there are some pay negotiations that are still ongoing, and will continue to stand in solidarity with workers to ensure that their contribution is acknowledged and valued, and I would urge the Minister to bring these to a speedy resolution. As with every single public service, we should be looking at how we can do better and work better on this island to improve the outcomes for our citizens. That just makes common sense. The North West Cancer Centre in Dungannon has provided patients in County Donegal with a vital resource and has become an example of all-Ireland cooperation in healthcare, making a tangible impact to people's lives. Likewise, the All-Ireland Congenital Heart Disease Network is an excellent joint initiative that has provided high-quality, comprehensive support to children with congenital heart defects. And initiatives such as the €10 million provided in 2023 to fund 250 undergraduate nursing and midwifery places at Ulster University and Queen's University, an additional €9.5 million committed for 24 to 28 to support 161 extra places in various health and social care professions should be continued and strengthened. An improved all-island approach to healthcare would not only improve the quality of life for people on our island, but also make our health system more sustainable. Príomh-Leas Ceann Comhairle, I'm conscious, as you have outlined, this is a budget debate and not a debate on our health service. And it's not the Health Minister but the Finance Minister in the Chamber today. But improving health goes beyond just the responsibility for the Minister of Health, and it requires proper funding. As I said yesterday, the Executive has made health a priority, and correctly so, and the Finance Minister has made over 50% of his available budget to the Department of Health. I also said yesterday it is obvious that the available budget to the Finance Minister and to the Executive from Westminster is clearly not enough. Our public services have been decimated by years of underfunding from successive Westminster budgets, and all of that is impacting negatively on what ministers here can do, and ultimately this impacts on the citizens that we represent. In conclusion, I believe it is important that we continue to speak on this matter with one voice and to support the current Finance Minister as he continues to negotiate for additional funding and seeks to achieve greater fiscal sustainability in the long term to improve or to help improve all of our public services.
Thank you, Philip. I call Deborah Erskine, Chair of the Committee for Infrastructure.
Thank you, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to speak as Chair today on the second stage of the Budget Bill, and I welcome the Minister into his new place and thank him for his work and his assistance during his time as Infrastructure Minister. I know he will miss every single member of the Infrastructure Committee, including myself. But over recent weeks, the Committee for Infrastructure has, as part of its ongoing financial scrutiny, engaged with departmental officials and Transitional to get a sense of their assessment of their needs over the course of the next financial year. The Committee will also be hearing oral evidence from Northern Ireland Water on its requirements for next year at its meeting tomorrow. Due to the time constraints that this Assembly has to consider the provisions of the bill, it was critical that time was factored into the Committee's work programme to get a sense of the Department's requirements. In addition, this is in the context of having a draft budget that is currently being consulted upon, and therefore the final allocations for the Department and to those who it provides resource to are not yet fully known. Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, whilst I recognise that the bill before us today reconciles and gives authority for the use of resource for the 24-25 spring supplementary estimates and for the first few months of the next financial year, I would be appreciative of a little latitude to convey to the House the Committee's approach. Over the last 12 months, the Department has faced a number of challenges on issues relating to our water infrastructure, addressing the backlog of MOTs, traffic congestion in and around Belfast, and the condition of our road network and its wider impact on road safety. As indicated by the Deputy Chairperson during yesterday's debate, and I want to thank him for speaking on behalf of the Committee yesterday, the Committee noted that the impact of recent storms has resulted in departmental pressures due to the level of available resource for remedial works to restore or replace items that were damaged. Whilst the Committee has sought further detail from the Department to establish how these pressures will be managed, it is important that this remedial work is completed to ensure that our infrastructure meets the needs of our constituents right across Northern Ireland. As we have seen, the adverse weather left thousands without power, access to water and unable to go about their daily commute due to the blockage of roads from fallen trees and other key parts of our infrastructure. Given the seemingly more regular frequency of these types of events, it is becoming increasingly important that the necessary resources are available to respond to such events. The committee will be interested to receive further detail of the actual costs incurred once this analysis becomes available. Turning to road safety, as the House will be aware, the upgrade of the A5 was announced, which aims to reduce the number of those killed or seriously injured on our roads. However, road safety is not limited to users of the A5, but across the entire road network across Northern Ireland. As the Deputy Chairperson outlined in yesterday's debate, the committee has engaged extensively with departmental officials throughout the year to identify where pressures are being faced and the proposed response to try and address them. The committee knew from the outset the challenges faced by the department when seeking to balance its budget allocation against managing its core functions. As a committee and members of this House, we all want to see more development in our infrastructure so that we can deliver more homes, maintain our roads, develop our public transport network and meet our future commitments under the Climate Change Act. However, for this to occur, we need the investment to provide the much-needed building blocks that will be an enabler to help address the shortage of housing, to maintain the condition and safety of our road network and develop our transport network to provide a meaningful alternative for road users who are reliant on their vehicles. With a high capital spend, the Department's need for a multi-year budget is well-rehearsed discussion that requires a resolution to provide the certainty of funding for capital projects which can take a number of years to complete. Only then can we start to make an impact to address our wider goals of delivery. During oral evidence on the 5th of February, the committee noted that under the Reinvestment and Reform Initiative, RRI, borrowing of £105.7 million was being earmarked for Northern Ireland Water. Theoretically, this should provide some additional funding to enable Northern Ireland Water to progress upgrades to our ageing network, but the extent of these will largely be impacted by the overall allocation in the final budget. Given the cost of borrowing, this will undoubtedly be an area of interest in the committee's future work, and we will undoubtedly be exploring this in more detail with Northern Ireland Water tomorrow to get a sense of the capital projects that it will be progressing from this funding. In addition, it will be important to gain an understanding of the specific benefits that will derive from this spend and how it may be used to alleviate the historic nature of underfunding across our water network. Turning to our roads, over recent years, the constraints upon our public finances has meant that the Department has only been able to deliver a limited service to maintain our roads, which, as all members across this House will know, has seen the deterioration of our roads throughout all of our constituencies. Whilst additional funding has typically been secured from monitoring rounds, the absence of a specific provision at the start of the financial year means that the Department has no certainty of funding for its winter service, which includes the gridding of our roads. Looking forward, our roads will continue to be a critical component in supporting us in our daily lives. However, future commitments under the Climate Change Act will require us to adapt our transport network and how we use it. The committee welcomed the opening of the new Grand Central Station in Belfast, which will provide a regenerated hub in Belfast with the capacity to reduce our reliance on cars. However, whilst this investment is welcome, it needs to be complemented by the equivalent upscaling of services to promote a modal shift from our reliance on cars. At the same time, we must take the time to understand the needs and the barriers faced by those living across our communities, and particularly in rural areas, so we can best seek to provide services that meet their needs, albeit with finite and stretched resources. In addition, we need to see an acceleration in our network to accommodate the changing needs of motorists as they switch from petrol or diesel-powered vehicles to electric or zero emission forms of transport. This acceleration needs a holistic approach to identify viable improvements in our current systems that support our future needs. The electric vehicle charging network is a key component within this, and following Northern Ireland's inclusion in the Vehicle Emissions Trading Scheme, future demand will continue to grow as a result of the targets placed upon vehicle manufacturers when phasing out the scale of combustion-powered vehicles to greener alternatives. We need to be innovative to develop solutions to help us overcome the barriers in accelerating this delivery by reviewing relevant areas within our planning system, our use of financial transactions capital for private sector borrowing, and the wider capacity across our electricity network. In addition, this requires our public transport to evolve to greener forms of transport to lead the way and reduce the pollution caused by harmful greenhouse gases. This, as we all know, will require significant capital investment over a number of years, particularly for TransLink. However, given our future commitments under the Climate Change Act, we need to provide adequate funding to allow this to occur. I understand and accept the need for the bill to progress without delay to ensure that departments have the legislative authority for the first few months of the next financial year. So, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, I do want to just turn very briefly to a few remarks that I want to make as DUP MLA for Fermanagh and South Tyrone. It's no surprise that infrastructure is a key economic driver in our society, and it's key that we scrutinise where the money is spent. The numbers that are on a page will affect everything outside these doors. Talked about roads there, and obviously from my point of view as a Fermanagh and South Tyrone MLA, and I'm looking over the chamber there at my colleague from the same area, rural roads is vitally important, and we cannot and should not forget the need to ensure that they are maintained to a proper standard and that we see development of them as well. And our rural roads need urgent attention, particularly after the storm as well. And I would like to see budgets focused on this with a ring fencing of our rural roads funding pot, which I have made mention to in my role on the committee. In terms of capital projects, of which there are many within infrastructure, the work of my colleague Diane Forsyth has been vital in terms of how funding is allocated, how budgets run over, and how the time it takes to deliver these projects is spent. And I recognise within the Infrastructure Department, as a Minister will have known very, very well, legal challenges also play a role in that. And whilst that's not negating the fact that it's important that people have an opportunity to challenge decisions that are made, we also have to take that into consideration on how this impacts upon vital infrastructure projects across Northern Ireland. If we don't have the right budget, if that is not allocated appropriately, if money and time runs over, this costs every department in Northern Ireland, and we have to take a very strategic look at it, and I thank my colleague for her work in relation to this. Moving on to other issues such as NI Water, capital is of paramount importance to unlock areas of constraint, and discussion must now move on to proper solutions. I'm glad to see the Minister is bringing forward the consultation on the developer-led contributions, and I will be watching that very, very carefully to make sure that it does actually do what it says on the tin and work on the ground for people. But discussions must move on and we must have action, and I urge the Minister not just to put the eggs all in one basket, but to bring forward an ambitious approach to dealing with this issue. Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, my colleague Stephen Dunn did put forward many pertinent points yesterday in terms of infrastructure, so I will not rehearse everything, but just to say in terms of modal shift and the need to move people out of cars and onto public transport. It is key that we have a budget that reflects that, to understand the concerns of rural people who can't access that public transport network, whether to get to work or to socialise. And I would like to say, in terms of the real review, I think it's important that we see an ambitious approach taken to that, that we see budgets match up to delivery in terms of that. I'm glad to see that the union connectivity did provide funding for feasibility studies, but I will say this, I would like to see Fermanagh included in that, and I think we need to take a strategic approach to looking at how our budgets match up to all of those policies that sometimes, unfortunately, tend to sit on shelves. But I would like to see them dusted down and actually have an ambitious approach to infrastructure and how we fund it. So, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, suffice to say, I will be watching carefully where this money goes, as it does affect our daily lives. And therefore, I urge officials to understand our need as elected representatives to have information in a timely and clear way, that we have complete transparency, so that we have fulsome scrutiny of these issues. So thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. I call Paula Bradshaw, Chair of the Executive Office Committee.
Thank you, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker. I just want to start by welcoming the Finance Minister to his new role and wish him well in that regard. I rise to make some comments on behalf of the Committee for the Executive Office. The Department has a relatively modest budget, starting with a flat cash reserve DEL budget of £182 million. According to briefings by the Department, this was revised to £183 million in June and £187 million in October. The spring supplementary estimates now show a resource DEL expected spend of £194 million, along with £22 million capital DEL. It is also important to note that the majority of the money that has been earmarked for things such as support for victims and survivors of abuse, which means that the Department has very little wriggle room when expected to manage budget pressures. But while the total amount of relatively small, the total amounts are relatively small, the Department deals with some of the most sensitive issues in our society. Victims and survivors of the conflict, victims and survivors of historical institutional child abuse, victims and survivors of mother and baby institutions, and fostering good relations between our communities. The Committee strives to ensure that the resources for these things are sufficient and that the money is well spent. While financial scrutiny has been applied to questions of small amounts of spending, the Committee has been particularly exercised about how payments through the redress scheme for historical institutional abuse are to be recovered from those institutions that were responsible for the terrible ill-treatment of the children. By the time the redress closes to new applications in April this year, it is estimated that some £100 million will have been paid or allocated from the block grant to cover the costs of the redress scheme. Yet, despite constant questions from the Committee around this, we still have no idea how much the institutions will pay back to the public purse. We know that interim payments from some of the institutions have been paid, but we have no idea how much has been paid and the degree to which the institutions will contribute to future requirements for specialist services such as mental health support for the victims and survivors. And so while, yes, the state was also culpable in what happened to the most vulnerable people in our society, so it should be that we expect that the institutions do contribute and that the process is transparent. The victims and survivors of this abuse are adamant that the institutions must pay out, and the Committee fully supports this and continues to pressure on the Department to use whatever levers are necessary to ensure that this is the case. This is the theme to which the Committee is compelled to return. We will have legislation this year for an inquiry into mother and baby institutions and a redress scheme, and we may well have the same for historical clerical sexual abuse in the future. This is something that needs to be done right, and the resources made available for that purpose. The draft budget for 2025-26 suggests that there will be an uplift in the coming year, £84 million for non-earmarked Dell and 155 million earmarked for Resource Dell. The committee looks forward to being consulted on how the department will spend that money and being involved in the decisions being made on future spending and setting priorities for funding. Indeed, we anticipate hearing from the department in detail on these spending plans shortly. Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, I would just like to make one point really in my capacity as the MLA for the Alliance Party. Finance Minister, you will probably be aware that there is a long list of commissioners that need to be appointed, and there's a similarly long list of draft strategies and reviews to be signed off within the Executive Office. And I appreciate that your focus is very much on budget allocations and spending, but I would like you and your officials to be mindful that the reality is that these delays in services, programmes and support being brought forward is really impacting on our most marginalised, our most disadvantaged and our most vulnerable in society. And so these may be delays in spending, but I would say that the use of public money will have less impact the longer these projects and programmes are delayed. Oh yes, please, go ahead.
I was going to ask her a question out of curiosity since she raised it. Has her department, her committee I should say, been scrutinising the budget and the related lack of a plan for the Maze Long Cash Corporation? I just wondered if there's anything more she had heard through this process about that.
No, we haven't. Thank you for your question. No, we haven't. But in that long list of commissioners and board members and etc., the Maze Long Cash is amongst them. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. I call Colin Gildernew, Chair of the Committee for Communities.
Omagh, Prayer Last Can Corlia. So I rise as Chair of Communities to address the Assembly on this budget bill. Given the extensive discussion yesterday on the supply resolution and its linked motions, I will not rehearse those points again. Instead, I will focus on the critical issues in this bill that impact the Department for Communities and the people who rely on its services. The budget bill is not just a procedural matter, it's a reflection of the choices we make in how we fund essential services, support our most vulnerable and plan for the future. One important aspect of the bill is that it provides legal authority for certain spending that currently rests on the sole authority of the Budget Act. This is spending that in normal circumstances would require specific legislation, but is instead being authorised through the budget bill as an interim measure. For the Department for Communities, this includes $12 million for supplementary welfare reform and mitigation payments, which provide essential support to people impacted by welfare changes. These payments are vital, yet they lack a permanent legislative footing for both recipients and the organisations that help administer them. While we welcome the Minister's assurance that a statutory footing for these payments will be introduced this year, the fact remains that at present they remain in a precarious position, dependent on temporary measures. This lack of permanence creates uncertainty for those who rely on these payments and the organisations that administer them. Another pressing issue is the increasing reliance on headroom funding, with the Executive allocating $183.3 million across all departments. Of this, $3.3 million in Resource Dell and $1.5 million in Capital Dell is allocated to Department for Communities. While headroom funding helps ensure that additional resources are not lost, it also creates instability. Departments and service providers cannot make long-term plans if they do not know whether this funding will be sustained. This particularly affects in relation to communities' housing support and homelessness prevention, social security payments and discretionary welfare support, and funding for local councils and voluntary organisations. Without long-term financial certainty, housing providers cannot commit to multi-year investments, and community organisations are left in limbo, unsure if their funding will continue beyond the immediate term. People in crisis should not have to wait for last-minute reallocations to find out whether essential support schemes will continue. I know that the Minister is keenly aware that we need less last-minute reallocations and more stable, needs-based budgeting. The British Government must also step up and play its part to make this a reality. The Committee has heard directly from the Department for Communities about the difficulties posed by financial instability. Instead of being able to focus on long-term improvements, the Department is constantly, we are told, forced to react to funding shortfalls and unexpected pressures. This instability has real and damaging consequences. Fewer social and affordable homes are being built, key housing and regeneration projects face delays, and ongoing uncertainty surrounds the Supporting People programme and discretionary welfare assistance. The Budget Bill grants the necessary legal authority for spending, but it does not address the deeper financial challenges facing the Department and the Executive as a whole. Public services here in the North continue to be underfunded compared to objective need. Without a fair funding settlement from Westminster, we will continue to see departments struggling to balance their budgets, essential services stretched to their absolute limits, and vital programmes operating with no long-term certainty. The Committee for Communities will continue to scrutinise spending decisions to ensure public money is used effectively, to push for a more strategic multi-year budgeting approach so that services are not forced into crisis management, and examine the proposed solution to welfare mitigation funding, ensuring that people get the support they need without relying on emergency budget measures. The Budget Bill is a necessary step, but is not a solution. We must move towards a funding model that is stable, strategic and fair, one that allows departments to plan effectively, ensures resources are directed where they are most needed, and gives certainty to the people and the organisations that rely on these services. The Committee will continue to hold the Department to account, but financial oversight alone will not fix a system that is structurally underfunded. That is a challenge not only for the Executive, but for the British Government, which must acknowledge the unique financial pressures facing the North and step up to support with a more sustainable funding model. Our communities who depend on these services cannot afford another year of last-minute fixes, emergency reallocations and financial uncertainty. We need a better way forward.
Much appreciated, Colin. Thank you. I call Steve Aiken.
Thank you very much indeed, Deputy Principal Speaker. Minister, it becomes no surprise after yesterday's debate that we'll be supporting the passage of the second stage of the Budget Bill. The 15 clauses and 3 schedules cover the 31 billion as laid down in the schedule and the estimates, including the revised total amount of 26.536 billion. We're also aware, and I think the Chair of our Finance Committee has raised the issue about the National Insurance contribution, and how I think I would add our concerns to the fact that the Department of Finance hasn't been able to do the necessary estimates of the likely costs that is to be, even by this stage. I appreciate and I thank the Minister for his commitment to come to the committee as quickly as possible when those details are done. But I think for many of us there has to be a concern that the Department of Finance, with its specific role to deal with HR issues across the whole of the Northern Ireland Civil Service, haven't looked at these figures and identified these figures as they've come through yet. There is a lot of impacts that still need to be worked through in the detail, and I think my sort of learned friend and chair of the committee has pointed out the fact that many of the committees need to get to the bottom and get through the details of the estimates and the rest of it. Bearing in mind sort of the commentary from my friend Mr Gaston yesterday about our trillion-sized budget across a billion-sized budget, it actually made me have a look quite closely at some of the figures within the sort of the Memorandum of Understanding, and also particularly within the sort of the other documentation that we have in front of us, including the Budget Bill, Explanatory and Financial Memorandum that's come before us. And I do notice in paragraph 10, specifically it talks about sort of the consolidated fund for Northern Ireland 24-25, and the bill will authorise a revised total amount of 26.5 billion. Now, the 26.5 billion I've checked against the supplementary estimates and the spring estimates, and yes, that figure does indeed to be correct. But it does say the vote on account of 12.148 billion. Now, Minister, the vote on account is 45%. Now, 45% of the figure of 26.536 billion doesn't equate to 12.148 billion. It comes to 11.941 billion. There's a difference there of £650 million. Now, I might be reading this wrong, and I probably am, and that's just an initial look at what I'm trying to do. But bearing in mind the fact we've already picked up some inconsistencies in the supplementary estimates, the messages that have been coming across to us, and the detail that's been there, I do think there needs to be a good scrutiny of what's coming before us. And not now, Minister, because I wouldn't put you in the spot like that, but maybe you could task your officials to come back to the Finance Committee and just explain that discrepancy. Either the vote on the account is wrong, either the figure they've used initially is wrong, or we're £650 million out, which I don't think is a position we should be in, the rest of it. I think there is a lot more detail in this, and I think it's up to the committees to go through these. And actually, I encourage every member of this Assembly to properly scrutinise the documentation that is before them. It is our duty to make sure that the departments are held to account, and it does not just reside with the Department of Finance to make sure this is correct. But I think it's important that we do this, and we do this degree of scrutiny. I shall keep my remarks to that point. I will bring my remarks to the close, Minister. But again, we appreciate the fact you're going to get back to us on the national insurance contribution issue fairly quickly, and also if we can resolve that issue of what the voting count actually is, and whether the £650 million is just me not being able to do the maths right, or whether it's not written down right. But I suspect there's something in between there that needs looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Much appreciated. I call Tom Buchanan.
Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to make a few comments on the second stage of the budget bill today as a member of the DERA committee. And I do know that the chair of the committee did highlight a number of issues yesterday, so my comments will be kept brief. Our agriculture, industry and farm businesses are the cornerstone of the rural economy and are fundamental to our local communities and rural life, and I welcome the fact that the Agriculture Support Fund has been ring-fenced as part of a draft executive budget in 24-25. However, we would have liked to have seen it increased in line with inflation. Direct farm support is essential to our farming, the agriculture sector and by extension the Northern Ireland economy. And it is therefore vital that this statement of intent is built upon in future financial years. One of the huge financial pressures on the department budget is bovine TB. Almost £56 million was spent on the control of TB in the last year, and whilst current estimates indicate a rise in programme costs of approximately £60 million for this financial year, this current situation with respect to dealing with bovine TB in the next financial year is not only stark, but we believe to be unsustainable. The Veterinary Services Animal Health Group projects an increase in compensation of £14.2 million above the £32.3 million baseline, yet the Minister proposes to allocate just £3.6 million, leaving a significant shortfall of some £10.6 million. This is there is also a projected deflect of £3 million in terms of the department's proactive work in reducing TB incidences. It is therefore clear that the current proposed allocation falls far short of what is needed to proactively tackle this disease, and I urge the Finance Minister to reflect on the prospective impact of not adequately funding TB compensation or future interventions. And going forward, we must see positive action from the DERA Minister in bringing forward proposals to deal with this issue that has been long-standing for many, many years. In these challenging financial times with small margins and high input costs, it is imperative that the budget supports the vitality of farm businesses as well as promoting profitable and productive agriculture. The increase in the national insurance contributions will also have a huge financial bearing on our farm businesses in terms of labour costs, and this, coupled with the inheritance tax proposals, has the potential to see the end of the road for many farm businesses. Yet within this budget, I don't see any mitigating measures to help absorb our national insurance costs. It is therefore vital that the Finance Minister leaves no stone unturned in making the case for this funding in full from the Treasury and continuing to lobby for the removal of the inheritance tax. And turning for a moment to public services as a member of the Public Accounts Committee, while investment in public services is vital, so too is ensuring that projects are delivered on time and within budget. So when we hear some of the other parties relentlessly calling for the devolution for further fiscal powers, perhaps it should focus our attention towards tackling some of the preventable waste within the system. The scale of financial mismanagement within Northern Ireland Civil Service is deeply concerning. The recent revelation of a $2.445 billion overspend on major capital projects raises serious questions about oversight, accountability and the responsible use of taxpayers' money. It is clear that accountable mechanisms are wholly inadequate. The Northern Ireland Civil Service Board does not have proper oversight. Moreover, there has been a long-standing concern that committees are not provided with timely information, sufficient detail, adequate time for scrutiny, or indeed the presence of officials to analyse department bids, expenditure and future spending. In particular, departments ought to provide briefings on bids for monitoring rounds no longer than 7 days following submission to the Department of Finance, as stipulated in legislation. And therefore, Principal Deputy Speaker, in going forward, these issues must be adequately dealt with, as we cannot continue to sustain such exorbitant overspends within our budget, given all the other pressures that there are within all of the other departments. And therefore we will be continuing to scrutinise these issues to make sure that a budget is spent in the most efficient and effective way. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I call Donny Donnelly.
Thank you, Principal Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister of Finance for bringing this budget bill today for the second stage, and I congratulate him on his new position, along with his colleagues, new Minister for Economy and the new Minister for Infrastructure, who we will miss at the Health Committee. I rise to speak in this debate in my capacity as the Alliance Party Health spokesperson. Whilst our difficult financial position is evident in every department, none faces such overwhelming pressures as our health service. Many times in this chamber we have discussed growing waiting lists, challenges around discharging patients from hospitals and the crises in respite service care provision and domiciliary care, and that's just to mention a few of the many serious issues in the health service. But we should take this opportunity to acknowledge any progress that has been made, and the Minister of Health deserves credit for meeting the pay requirements for our health service staff through in-year allocations. Ensuring that those health and social care workers who perform an essential and invaluable role are paid appropriately must be a priority for the Department of Health, and that progress is welcome. Without health service workers, there is no health service. Although it is noted that there is a £36.5 million financial pressure on GP practices, community pharmacies and other social care providers due to the rise in employers' national insurance contributions from the recent UK Government budget, and no mitigation measures have so far been announced. As has already been highlighted many times, Northern Ireland continues to have both the most expensive health service in the UK and the worst outcomes. Our waiting lists are among the highest in Europe. Most targets are consistently missed. There is a growing risk that if these targets are not, issues are not targeted, we could be moving towards a two-tier system where only those who can afford to do so can avail of essential treatments. And that would go against everything our health service can and should stand for. In effect, we already have a two-tier system here in Northern Ireland, with many people across our communities feeling they have no choice but to spend huge amounts of their savings, borrowed money, or money from family members to access health care. And this is shameful and a huge failure. As we all know, health receives by far the largest allocation of the budget. Clearly something is going wrong. The challenges facing the Department of Health will not be resolved simply through more money. The health budget has increased by over £2 billion since 2020. Last week in the Health Committee, the Minister mentioned some of the unsuccessful bids he had submitted, most of which would have required more money. And while it is understandable that he is seeking additional funding for such projects, that is what he should be doing, it is impossible to facilitate every request from every department. And I believe that the Minister must seriously consider how his own department could be run more effectively and efficiently. We need to do things better in healthcare provision. As highlighted by the Chair of the Health Committee, there is a clear need for investment in primary care, domiciliary care, and for the strategies to improve people's health care across Northern Ireland, such as the mentioned mental health strategy, which has been underfunded now for many years. What is also needed is reform and transformation, and the Minister has spoken many times about his desire to shift left. This is in line with the principles of the Bengoa report, Systems Not Structures, from 2016. We have discussed Bengoa many times, and while we always hear positive language from members of all parties on the need for that reform, it is not always reinforced by action. Just a few weeks ago, we discussed the crisis in our health service on Opposition Day, and some of the examples in which the decisions of local MLAs and councillors contradict the stated aims of their parties in respect of reform in Bengoa specifically. Reform must be more broadly a priority for the Executive and the Department, not just health. These must include reforming these institutions so that the Assembly and the Executive are never again collapsed and held down by a single party. With the cycle of crisis and collapse, the 2024-25 budget was the 10th single year budget in a row. How can the ministers ever plan for anything in the medium to long term if they are only working on the basis of a single year budget? This is especially relevant for health. Much of the transformation agenda will take years to carry out and will require substantial changes to how every trust and every hospital operate. We must therefore seek to end ransom politics and move towards being a more mature and proper democratic assembly where parties can take difficult things and don't walk away collapsing the assembly when things get tough. Finally, we must address the cost of division. It is estimated that continuing divisions on the basis of our political and religious divide costs our economy up to £400 million a year. Imagine how valuable this additional funding would be. While the UK Treasury must take some of the blame for our current financial predicament, it is understandable that the UK Government expects us to look at specific options for addressing our own financial problems. Addressing division would be one of the easiest ways to do so. In conclusion, Principal Deputy Speaker, I welcome the passage of this budget bill, following our useful debate on the spring supplementary estimates yesterday. It is an important role for any executive, but it provides an opportunity to discuss what our priorities should be going forward, and I look forward to hearing from other members and working with the Minister of Health in particular to progress urgent reforms and to ensure that health and social care is accessible to everyone in Northern Ireland when they need it. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Gemma Dolan.
And I want to thank the Minister for bringing the budget bill to the floor of the Assembly and take this opportunity to wish him well in his new role. I also want to recognise the work of the previous Finance Minister, Dr Kiva Archibald, particularly on securing the interim fiscal framework, which marks a significant improvement in our funding model. This secured an extra £248 million for our public services for the forthcoming year that otherwise wouldn't have been available. It was a recognition from the British Government that the North has been underfunded below need and a commitment that we will be funded at or above the relative level of need in future financial years. Unfortunately, a decade and a half of Tory austerity has starved our public services of vital funding, and there are considerable challenges which we continue to face. It is welcome, therefore, that this budget has prioritised investing in areas which will be most effective in improving the lives of workers, families and communities here. We are all well aware of the strain that the health and social care sector is under and the need for transformation. However, there is a recognition in this budget that additional funding is required to support services in the interim. Doubling the allocation for childcare is another significant step in helping to mitigate financial pressure on parents and will support them to remain part of the workforce or return to work. The decision by the British Government to remove ring fencing for agricultural support funds was extremely disappointing, which caused concern to the farming community at a time when they are facing other issues such as the inheritance tax, and I am pleased that funding for DAERA is an earmarked allocation. In my own constituency of Fermanagh and South Tyrone, the investment from the Mid-South West Growth Deal will be a key driver in helping with addressing regional economic imbalance and will see the delivery of a vital piece of infrastructure in the A4 Enniskillen bypass. There also remains an onus on the British Treasury to alleviate the additional pressure that their decision to increase national insurance contributions is putting on our public finances, and I would reiterate the call for them to cover these costs in full. There is an obvious need for more fiscal devolution, which will provide us with greater flexibility around budgets and enable us to achieve greater fiscal sustainability in the longer term. And I welcome the efforts of the previous finance ministers in this area and the commitment of the new minister to continue this work.
Thank you, Gemma. I call Joanne Bunting, Chair for the Committee of Justice. Joanne.
Thank you, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker. I welcome the opportunity to speak as Chairman of the Committee for Justice on the Budget Bill and declare that I have an immediate family member who works in the legal profession. Throughout the last year, the Committee has scrutinised the Department of Justice's budget through regular oral and written briefings and updates. The 2024-25 budget was described in oral evidence by senior departmental officials as the most challenging the departments have ever faced. with the Executive having just £1 billion above funding baselines to allocate against reported pressures totalling over £3 billion across departments. The Permanent Secretary also reported that the Justice budget has only increased by 13% over 13 years, with the block grant increasing by 53% over the same period. The Department's share of the block grant has fallen from just under 11% in the 2011-2012 year to around 8% currently. This has undoubtedly contributed to pressures being felt across all areas of the justice system. The Department's opening budget for 2024-25 was £1,262 million, which included £31.2 million of additional security funding and £12.8 million for the Tackling Paramilitarism Programme funding. That left an opening non-ring-fenced resource allocation of £1,218.4 million. Against this opening baseline, the Department initially reported pressures of £446 million for 2024-25. The Department received £95 million of the £1 billion available to the Executive, which reduced those pressures to around £350 million. The Department also submitted capital bids of £122 million for the 24-25 year and received an allocation of £92 million, a shortfall of 25% of what was required for inescapable and high-priority projects. As members will know, the Department of Justice's budget is mostly demand-led, with the majority taken up by the police service, courts and tribunals service, prisons and through legal aid spend. Those demands show no signs of abating, with all areas across the justice system reporting pressures in year. The Department submitted non-ring-fenced resource bids totalling £349.2 million as part of the June monitoring round, and received a general allocation of £35.02 million. This was split across a number of directorates and agencies and included allocations of £7.4 million to the Legal Services Agency and £23 million to the PSNI. A further £5.2 million was allocated to the Legal Services Agency and almost £36 million allocated to the PSNI as part of the October monitoring round. While all business areas will have benefited from the extra funding provided to them in year, it was particularly welcome in both of these areas. Legal aid is essential to ensuring that citizens are able to access justice. It is not acceptable that delaying legal aid payments to practitioners has been used by the Department as a budget management tool. Evidence we have received indicates this makes legal aid work less attractive to members of the profession and those entering it, which will ultimately impact the ability of people, some of whom are the most vulnerable in our society, to access justice. Members will be aware that judgment was delivered recently in a case by the Bar of Northern Ireland and the Law Society for Northern Ireland on the practice of delaying payments for legally aided work, and I understand the Department is working through the implications of that judgment. Nonetheless, the Committee is pleased to note that the average time taken to make such payment has decreased over recent months. Turning to the PSNI, while the in-year funding has helped towards policing pressures, we must not ignore the fact that the number of police officers has fallen to an all-time low of 6,300, a position described by the Chief Constable as extremely concerning. Members of this House will know that New Decade, New Approach set a target of 7,500 officers. Our recruitment campaign began on the 22nd of January this year, which is welcome and long overdue, but that's just about replacing officers at this stage. The Committee has been informed that the PSNI has developed a business case to increase the number of officers to 7,000 over the next 3 years. And this will, of course, require significant financial investment and recurring costs in the coming years. But also, it will take a considerable period for those graduating from the Police College to actually be on the beat. The Committee was pleased to find that 3 of the Department's transformation programmes have progressed to the final stage in the process. These important projects relate to electronic tagging, speeding up and transforming the justice system, and reducing offending and the prison population. The Department has indicated these programmes would cost around £53 million over a 5-year period, so additional funding from the Transformation Fund would be very welcome, but there remains much more to be done. The bids submitted by the Department as part of the in-year monitoring process included what the Department has advised are exceptional pressures of £227 million relating to holiday pay, McLeod entry to feelings and the PSNI data breach. No funding was allocated to these pressures, and at this stage it's not clear when these costs will crystallise. The Department advised, however, that these exceptional pressures cannot be managed within its budget allocation and informed the committee that the then Finance Minister had indicated her intention to explore the potential for making a reserve claim from His Majesty's Treasury in respect of these pressures. Briefly looking forward, aside from the exceptional pressures of the £227 million which will be carried forward into the coming year, the Department had reported non-ring-fence resource DEL stabilisation pressures of £206.8 million against its opening baseline budget of £1,218 billion. The Department has received an additional general allocation of £132.3 million, as well as additional security funding and funding for judicial salaries, reducing those stabilisation pressures to around £35 million. However, new pressures have since emerged, which means that the Department will be going into the new financial year with a shortfall of some £60 million. These new pressures include the increased employers' national insurance contributions, revised Northern Ireland Civil Service pay award assumptions, and the anticipated cost of an increase in legal aid fees. Committee members have voiced concerns about the impact that the increase in employers' national insurance will have on the justice sector, and in particular on the community and voluntary sector organisations who carry out important work on behalf of or in partnership with statutory agencies. Members were pleased that in oral evidence to the committee, officials confirmed that while the Department is not aware of what the actual costs might be, individual areas are alert to this issue and will engage directly with the community and voluntary organisations to deal with the pressures on a case-by-case basis. Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, I mentioned that additional costs are also anticipated in the coming year in respect of an increase in legal aid fees. A consultation is currently ongoing on a number of increases recommended by His Honour Tom Burgess in his review of criminal legal aid. Members will be aware that criminal barristers have withdrawn services for certain categories of criminal case. It's imperative, therefore, that efforts continue to be made to resolve the issues and that the interim uplift to legal aid is implemented at the earliest opportunity to prevent any further action, which, as I've said, can impact on the most vulnerable citizens in our society. These are two new pressures, but they are far from the only pressures that will be faced by the Department of Justice or its agencies within the next financial year. The Committee understands from both the Department and the Committee for Finance that the level of in-year funding is expected to be much less in 2025-26 than it has been in this current financial year. So the likelihood of in-year allocations to manage pressures is significantly diminished. Therefore, while the additional funding of £132.3 million allocation above the baseline is to be welcomed, the position for the Department is going into the new financial year will still be extremely challenging. Departmental officials advise that business areas are currently considering what actions are required to live within their allocation, and that difficult decisions will have to be taken. The Committee expects there to be ongoing engagement and that it is kept fully informed to help ensure that the Department's budget is maximised and key priority areas are funded to deliver effective outcomes right across the justice sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. I call Alan Chambers.
Well, Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the chance to make some brief remarks at this stage of the budget bill. I'll be focusing my comments on our health and social care system. I listened with interest to yesterday's debate on the spring supplementary estimates, and whilst there were many sensible points raised from across the chamber, what struck me most were a small number of comments from an even smaller number of MLAs who seemed to be casting doubt on even the existence of financial woes within the Department of Health. Anyone who tries to claim that our health service wasn't handed a poor financial deal at the start of 24-25 simply isn't living in the real world. And they certainly haven't been talking to the senior clinicians and service leaders who have spent almost the last year constantly firefighting and having to deliver unprecedented levels of saving as a direct result of it. Almost for the entirety of 24-25, the Department of Health has been existing in a significant deficit position. And while some MLAs are now almost using the fact that the Department and the Minister were able to balance the books as some sort of irrational justification for additional funds being unwarranted, these same MLAs are ignoring the undoubted damage that has been inflicted. Sorry, I want to make progress. Week after week, MLAs from across this chamber urge the Minister and the Health Department to do more on waiting times, to introduce new schemes and to invest more money into existing services. And yet the Executive, propped up by this Assembly, consciously took a decision last May not to invest money on waiting list reduction initiatives, not a single penny. So MLAs, and particularly those from the other executive parties, need to take some ownership for this.
Alan, could I just remind you that we're discussing the budget bill and
yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, was responding to comments that were made yesterday during the debate.
No, this is
I feel I have the right to...
No, excuse me, Alan, take your seat, please.
Okay.
A wee minute, just want to explain something to you.
Okay,
Alan, take your seat, please.
Oh, sorry.
So, I appreciate what members said yesterday, and your party had a right to respond, okay? Today we're talking about the budget bill, and I've given you loads of latitude, but in fairness to the comments I made to Matthew O'Toole, I would encourage you, even within the budget bill, to address some of your concerns through the budget bill. So continue. Thank you.
Almost finished, Madam Deputy Speaker. We'll just say that we could spend many hours in this chamber discussing the rights and wrongs of how the 24-25 allocations have panned out. But to sum it up, our health service, our patients and our health workers weren't given the priority that some in the chamber would like to pretend they were, and that was deeply disappointing. Thank you, Principal Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Alan, and sorry for disturbing your speech, but again, just in fairness for consistency, we need to play it across the board. Call Paul Frew.
Principal Deputy Speaker, and I will try to abide within your rulings here today.
Well, Paul, can I remind you? If you don't, I will remind you.
Must be the earliest intervention, Speaker. I maybe hold the record for that. Can I first of all start by paying tribute to the previous Minister, Dr. Kiva Archibald, and say that we worked well with that Minister in the committee. She always was approachable. She always was here to answer questions. We didn't always like the answers to the questions, but nonetheless she was here and she performed that role very well. And so I do give credit where credit is due, Speaker. And I also wish the new Minister well in his role. I know he's moved from one department to another, and it does take time to get to grips with a department and the functions of that. So I wish him well in his endeavours, because I believe we all want the same thing in this place, whether you're an Assembly member of this Assembly, or whether you're a member of the Executive. We want to do our best for the people who we represent. Can I also pay tribute to the members on the Finance Committee, my colleagues on that, because we are working well together and we are doing scrutiny well together, even when we don't get the information we desire in a timely fashion, even when we do have to ask on several occasions the same question over and over again. We do work well together, not least the Chair and the Deputy Chair. And it's very, very clear, Speaker, the vast knowledge and experience that those two individuals bring to the table. Of course, it's Matthew O'Toole, the Chairperson, and Diane Forsyth, the Deputy Chairperson. And I think that all members of that committee really value their expertise and their life experiences in this field. Can I first of all address, Speaker, the issue around the accelerated passage? And I know we've always granted accelerated passage for the budget bill, and I understand there's good reasons for that. What I take grave exception to is the actual question put to the committee, because I do not believe that we can truthfully state that we have had appropriate consultation when we do not have a committee stage. We guard religiously and really hard or committee stages in every single other bill, but we don't with regards to the budget bill. And I understand why that is. I understand the fast-moving nature of the budget bill and the reason why we need it imposed in order for things to continue to be paid. But I do think there is merit in looking at standing orders to change the question that is put to the Finance Committee, where it has to state that it has had appropriate consultation. I'm sure we can find a form of words that actually changes that so that we don't feel uncomfortable with answering that question in a positive. And of course, to answer it in a negative would put us in dire straits with regards to our finances and hurt people out there, and we don't want to do that. So I plead that this Assembly look at the standing orders. I think it's 42.2 around the question and the wording of the question. It comes from paragraph 20 of Strand 1 of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, paragraph 64.1 of the Act.
So here's your second.
So, okay.
Okay. So appreciate what you're saying, but this is really the next item of business that we're going to look at when we're looking at standing orders. And can I remind you and every other member of the Procedures Committee that at any stage you can change the wording of any standing order in this House. So please continue.
Thank you very much, Speaker. And you'll be glad to know I'll not need to speak in the next item of business on that. I put my views on record. It's very important. It's always been important, but it's never happened, that our budget, bills and our programme for governments, albeit draft, are aligned completely. That has never been the case. And it is not right to say that it is still the case today just because you have a draft programme for government, even high level as it is. That draft programme for government may change in the consultation, but we also need to make sure that the programme for government informs the budget bill. And remember, Speaker and everyone else in this House, that this budget bill gives authority for 45% of the spend in next year's budget. I can't really see any evidence in these blue pages where the programme for government has informed the spend, the areas of spend, the different areas of spend, who gets what, where and when. I don't really see it. And I think there has to be some way that on these blue pages of the budget bill that we actually align and state in these clauses the programme for government aim and objective. I think that way it would make it easier for MLAs who aren't necessarily on the Finance Committee, who aren't leads on committees, to actually understand the budget bill and actually what it does and the rationale for the millions here. The millions here are Timothy Gaston since the trillions here and the trillions there. And so I think that's a very important point too, Speaker. I will also state that it's important, I think, and a collective responsibility that all executive members support the budget bills, and I'm glad to see that there will be support right across the executive table for this budget bill. I'll await to see what happens in the budget bill number 2, which is a completely different animal altogether. And it is regrettable that the Ulster Unions didn't support the bill in its primitive form, because it's basically the outworkings in this budget bill now. I will speak also to health, because I do believe that health is the massive amount of spending in this budget bill. Nearly 50% of the budget. In fact, this budget bill actually, it is over 50%. And I do believe that it is not good enough, and other members have alluded to this, it is simply not good enough to give more money to health when the Health Department refuses to reform. The Health Department is ignoring its symptoms. It is absolutely ignoring its symptoms. And if the Health Department doesn't seek wise counsel on them symptoms, the Health Department will collapse, and with it, the care provision in this country. And that's why it's very important that we just do not give into relentless pressure of more money here and more money there, when the practices have to be reformed in order that we get more efficient spend. That's the same for every department, not just health. But I can see evidence in other departments of that reformation. I can't see any of it in health. Maybe that's because they are so under the cosh. Maybe that's because our waiting list times are growing, not shortening, and they can't lift their head. But it's about time that the Health Minister realised his symptoms and actually dealt with those symptoms before they become much worse. It is also clear that this Assembly and our people are facing unprecedented times. The Labour government, with regards to the national insurance hike for employers, is reckless, is absolutely reckless. And that's me being mild, Speaker. I also think that the inheritance tax on the farming community is a ticking time bomb, which will lead to could even lead to food shortages in some areas, and certainly the cost of doing business is rife. And so I want to see in this budget bill, because this budget bill authorises 45% of the spend in the next year, I want to see where we're trying to rescue the situation, where we're trying to support our employers, where we're trying to support our businesses, where we're trying to support our services that actually provide a service, not a product, so they can't put the cost, the burden of the national insurance, they can't put it on a product. How are we supporting that? A lot of these voluntary and charity organisations support government. If they weren't in place, the government couldn't do the job. And so how are we supporting, how in this budget bill are we supporting those organisations that provide a service that government relies on? I don't see it. I don't see it. And so that's very important that we raise these issues. We also talk about infrastructure, and my colleague Deborah Erskine raised this today. Vitally important that we make sure we have appropriate investment in our infrastructure, not just our roads or wastewater. Because if we do not spend adequate sums of money in this budget bill on our infrastructure, people will die. And that's why I think we need to take a more strategic look at how we spend money in health. Because it's always been the cry that if you don't spend more money on health, people die. Well, if you don't spend more money on infrastructure, people will die. If you don't spend more money in Department of Communities, people will die. And so it is as stark as that, Speaker, and it's important that we get to grips with the strategic vision and direction that a budget bill will take. I have been through so many budget debates, as has other members across the chamber, and it seems to be we do this robotic thing where committee chairs and leads place on the record, get it on Hansard, the gripes and the complaints and the concerns, and valid as they are, we're going through the motions. But when are we going to see strategic thought and vision coming out of the executive and the ministers there? I will allude, Speaker, as I always do, to the sole authority, and I'm glad to see that we're making progress and it is coming down. But even the £24.5 million that's now based in the sole authority, that could be quickly reduced by departments bringing forward bills. Where is the legislation? And I do think that's a very important point, because we have a fiscal council bill sitting there. Where is it? Where is it to put the fiscal council on a statutory footing? Where is the financial provisions bill from the Department of Finance that would do away with all of the executive offices, sole authority black boxes? And of course we have the biggest one, which is the welfare reform mitigations, and the Minister has promised that a bill will be forthcoming this year. So whilst I must applaud the progress that's been made, and it's because of the pressure the Finance Committee has placed on the executive over the last number of years that we have actually got this down, and we could actually see an end of the black box financial sole authority in the Budget Act. Now, I'm sure we need to keep the black box facility and the sole authority of the Budget Act. I think we need to keep that for things that's going to happen, especially around welfare reform, mitigation and everything else that comes with it, and other things that come to the fore, emergencies that come to the fore in year. So I'm not talking about getting rid of sole authority of the Budget Act or the black box system, but I want to see this reduced further, because it's not right that the Department of Finance has relied for so long and for so many millions on black box authority. I must say, DUP members of the Executive have stepped up with legislation. Where are the other pieces of legislation promised by the other ministers? We ain't seeing it, and it's certainly not happening in the Department of Finance. We were promised bills last July. We're still waiting for them now. And I think it's important that we raise the issues because the budget bill is a lot to do with the money that we get down. But there is also the element in the budget with regards to a rates base. And I do think that there's always a cry, and it's mostly from the opposition, but also from Sinn Féin, that we should have more fiscal powers. Well, I do not believe that we should get more fiscal powers to supplement budgets, budget bills, whenever we can see that, and it was raised yesterday, there are £2.45 billion of major capital projects overspent. That's shattering. That money could be spent in all so many ways: new schools, new hospitals. We have also a hospital, a state-of-the-art, spanking brand new hospital that can't even be opened, can't even be used. We have 119 million in unpaid rates that we can't get in. We have 65 million in rates written off. What could that 65 million do? So there are major issues still in the Executive and in the Department of Finance that needs to be resolved before you would even have a grown-up debate and conversation about further fiscal powers. We can't deal with the powers that we already have. Why would we need more? So it's very important that all ministers in this Executive get to grips with their departments, make sure that they are performing right. And I did hear the Minister of Finance defending his department yesterday. I take exception to that. The Minister has been in his department 5 minutes, and I'm not sure he'll have got the grips yet with the performance of the Department of Finance. Yes, I will, yes.
My department, I was defending the civil service against what I believe is an unjustified attack. And the member has already stated, I've been around the executive table in different modes for a number of years, so I am familiar with how the civil service works. When individual civil servants fail, they should be held to account like everyone else. But to point the finger of blame solely at the civil service in relation to the delays in building projects, in my opinion, is wrong.
Can I just remind a member that mentioning budget bill and then straying all over the shop isn't going to cut it? So could I just ask you, just within the actual budget bill, to address your remarks? Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker, and I will again bend to your ruling and try to keep to, and will keep to, the budget bill as much as I can. It is important that with this budget bill that we make sure that we have a strategic vision and direction, and I just don't see it well enough. I don't see it functioning well enough in the civil service to produce it, to perform it, to play it out, to spend the millions that we have in an appropriate, efficient way. And it's not just Department of Finance, not just Department of Health, it's many other departments also. So whilst we see millions on a page, a blue page, here, there and everywhere, I want to see greater alignment with the programme for government. I want to see greater efficiencies in our civil service. I want to see a bang for our buck for every time we pay tax and we pay rates. I want to see that money used wisely, and for the life of me, Speaker, I don't see it yet. Thank you.
Much appreciated. Sinead, you're down as the next speaker, but it's near 1 o'clock and I don't think it's fair on you to start to be interrupted for suspension. So you will be the first speaker after question time. Fair enough? Okay, so the Business Committee has arranged to meet at 1. So I propose, therefore, by leave of the Assembly, to suspend the sitting until 2 o'clock. And this will continue after question time, and the first member to be called will be Sinead McLaughlin. The sit-in is by leave suspended.
Assembly Chamber. Sound. 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 Assembly Chamber.